church business meeting that ran a little longer than usual. The 12 gathered around 4 tables in the fellowship hall. In the earlier meeting, Myra Thompson had received word that her church board, on her pastor's recommendation, had submitted her name for ordination. So leading a study on the parable of the soils out of Mark 4 would be her first semi-official act as a minister. Everyone welcomed the young man as he came in, gave him a Bible so he could study along. He didn't say much to the rest of the Bible study, which concluded a little after 9 p.m. And then his heads were bowed in prayer. Dylan Roof pulled out a 45 that he had hidden in his fanny pack and exclaimed, "I've come to kill some black people." Over the next 90 seconds, Roof emptied cartridge after cartridge. In all, 77 shots were fired, killing 9 of the 12 attendees. Felicia Sanders, when the gunshots erupted, pulled her daughter and dove under one of the tables. She believes she only survived because she looked dead, quote, covered by blood and brains. One of the slain was her own son, Twanza. At the end of the massacre, Ruth stood over Polly Shepherd and said that she would be spared so that she could tell the world what he had done. Now, in one sense, this pure evil perpetrated by Dylan Roof in Mother Emanuel Episcopal, African Episcopal Church in Charleston, South Carolina on June 17, 2015, finds its place in the litany of other infamous names: Columbine, Newtown, Aurora, Fort Hood, Paris, San Bernardino, and the list seems to go on and on. It's a litany that, in every sense, confirms the description that Jesus gave to the night of his betrayal, a night when darkness reigns. But in another sense, however, Charleston occupies a unique place, particularly among people of faith. The fact that this evil took place in a sanctuary, a shelter from danger and hardship, a refuge, a harbor, a safe house, caused many of us to feel the breath sucked out of our collective lungs as we heard the details come out about this massacre. I think many of us could picture ourselves in the place of those who are so mindlessly slaughtered that night. We've all been to Bible studies. As Felicia Sanders said, I always took Twanza to the Bible study because what is safer than a Bible study? And they were doing everything right. To paraphrase the words of Jesus, they were in their Father's house. They were about their Father's business. And they were doing exactly what we all would hope we would be doing in that situation. They welcomed a stranger. Without second thought, they opened their hearts and their sanctuaries to someone so different from them. And yet it was in that place that evil found them. Now, these feelings of displacement are not foreign to the biblical witness. In fact, if we're going to look for a biblical text in which these feelings are reflected, it makes sense to go to the place where all our emotions are reflected in the Bible, and that's the book of Psalms. So open with me, if you would, to Psalm 11, and listen as I read. In the Lord I take refuge. How can you say to me, flee like a bird to the mountain? For behold, the wicked bend the bow. They fitted their arrow to the string to shoot in the dark at the upright in heart. If the foundations are destroyed, what can the righteous do? Now, we have no hint from the text of what circumstances gave birth to this song. We're brought into a conversation that the psalmist is having with a friend or advisor, who's counseling that in the face of oncoming danger, the best path is a hasty retreat to a place of security. The psalmist begins with firm resolution. If I'm going to retreat, he says, it's going to be to the refuge of Yahweh, which means that I can't flee in the face of danger because the Lord is my refuge here. The psalmist is a realist. He doesn't minimize the situation. Danger lies in those shadowy places where the wicked wait with bended bows to ambush the upright in heart. Then in verse 3, there's an abrupt change because the danger is no longer out there. Now the disaster has invaded the very place of safety and security. Suddenly the stability that I knew, all the things that were holding me up are beginning to give way. And the psalmist voices a question that all of us ask in the recesses of our mind when the disaster comes from out there to in here. What can the righteous do? And I think this question really embodies the emotion that all of us experience when tragedy comes from out there to in here. It's a sense of powerlessness. See, these moments kind of bring a wrecking ball to our illusions that we're in control of the world around us. And they bring us to the point where we see the bankruptcy of our own resources. And that can be a good thing, because perhaps for the first time, we can really hear the truth of Jesus' promise. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And maybe we can even come to the place the Apostle Paul came to in 2 Corinthians 12, where he said, "This is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong." But our problem is that so many times we mistake feelings of powerlessness for feelings of helplessness. See, helplessness leaves us in a place of despair, stuck. Or it keeps us clinging to those illusions that we have control and leads us to a point of desperation where we're frantically looking around for props to hold up our crumbling foundation. What can the righteous do? Well, if you would permit me to rephrase that question, I'd like to ask this question. In the weeks following Charleston, what did the righteous do? Now, in retrospect, I have to say that I saw far more helplessness than powerlessness. I have to give a little disclaimer. My experience is limited to the community that I was involved in. And I don't want to sense that there was an us and a them, because I found my own reaction to this tragedy from a position of helplessness rather than powerlessness. But I want to say what I saw as a characteristic of our response was one of fear. I think we saw that, first of all, in the prayers that we prayed. Now, on June 21st, on the Sunday after, the first prayers went up for the victims and the families of that Charleston. But I would venture to say that the next prayers came out with that old, if I could use a paraphrase for that old coverall prayer, Lord, protect us, protect our loved ones from all harm, hurt, and danger. See, and I understand that reaction because I was afraid and our foundations were crumbling. Our next response, that was similar to the first, is that we circled the wagons and we began to hunker down. See, I think a new word entered and was listed on the agenda of church meetings afterwards, church staff meetings, and that was the word security. Words like threat assessment, evacuation plans were heard in church conference rooms throughout the country in the weeks following June 17th. In my own church, I became aware of a plan, unofficially and under the radar, to find out which members of the congregation had concealed weapon permits, so that a list could be put together, so that a schedule could be made, so that it would ensure that somebody who was armed would be at every worship session or every large group meeting. Now, I didn't have a CCW, so I didn't know whatever became of that plan, but I think other churches were not so circumspect. Listen to what Brian Olsch, he's the associate pastor of Trinity Lighthouse Church in Denton, Texas, said in just the days following the massacre. He said, "Personally, I wouldn't go to a church that didn't have armed security. There is no other place where people are welcomed and can come and go without question. I believe that every ministry owes it to their people." And I understand that reaction, because I want to be safe, and I want my loved ones and those I care for to be safe. and things were spiraling out of control and our foundations were crumbling. So we're brought back again to the question the psalmist asked. What can the righteous do? Surprisingly, the psalmist never directly answers his own question. He doesn't give a 5-step plan of how to prop up crumbling foundations. In fact, in the remainder of the psalm, he doesn't talk about foundations at all. He talks about a person. Listen. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. His eyes see. The eyelids test the children of men. The Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the one who loves violence. Let him rain coals on the wicked. Fire, sulfur, and scorching wind shall be the portion of his cup. For the Lord is righteous, and he loves righteous deeds. The upright shall behold his face. The discussion turns away from circumstances, and the center becomes the Lord, his location, his action, his values. The Lord is in his holy temple. The Lord's throne is in heaven. The emphasis here is on 2 aspects of God's character: his eminence and his transcendent sovereignty. Many times, especially when horrendous evil breaks into our sanctuaries, the greatest statement of faith is to say that God is still reigning. That God is still on the throne even when the foundations are crumbling around you and even when everything says otherwise. But I think so many times we use the Lord's sovereignty as kind of the fallback position, the fail-safe, that we kind of a one-size-fits-all package that we throw over every tragedy that comes our way. Even in the face of horrendous evil, we call on the Lord's sovereignty, and then we look for a scripture to back us up, and we quote Psalm 115:3. The Lord is in his heavens, and he does whatever he pleases. But this response separates the 2 declarations that the psalmist makes. The Lord is not only on his heavenly throne, he is also in his holy temple, the place literally where heaven and earth meet. The temple, the visible representation of God's desire to dwell among his people. See, God is not a mere spectator to the evil visited on his people. By condescending to dwell among them, God has taken on their plight. He has also become a victim of that evil. See, God is not a spectator. He's not passive in the face of crumbling foundations. The psalmist declared, the Lord has eyes that see. See, this affirmation should take us back to another biblical narrative, to the Exodus. Listen to what God says to Moses as to why he is sending him back to lead the people out of slavery in Egypt. He says, I surely have seen the affliction of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry because of the taskmasters. I know their suffering, and I have come down to deliver them. See, it is impossible for the Lord to remain impassive, to see and remain impassive. His very nature means that he will respond to the evil, and his evil will always lead to deliverance. See, in the face of blatant evil, the Lord reveals himself also as the judge of that evil. It says his eyelids test the sons of men. His judgment is based on what he values. The Lord tests the righteous, but his soul hates the one who loves violence. The Lord is righteous and loves righteous deeds. And the Lord is a warrior who will defeat evil in all of its manifestations. In words reminiscent of Sodom and Gomorrah, the psalmist envisions this scene. Let him rain coals on the wicked. Sulfur and fire and scorching wind will be the portion of his cup. The destruction of evil will be all-consuming. When the foundations are crumbling, what can the righteous do? The psalmist's answer is found in the last line of the psalm. The upright, the ones who are the very victims of the ambush of the wicked, will behold his face. The answer from Psalm 11 is that instead of frantically trying to prop out foundations that are meant to crumble, we should watch them fall so that we can make way for another kingdom. In the words of the writer Hebrew, a kingdom that cannot be shaken. So what does that look like? How do we get there? Well, going back through Psalm 11, it means that we acknowledge that the Lord is reigning, even when the foundations are crumbling. The Lord is our King. And if He's our King, then we cannot be passive in response to evil, the evil around us. We must adopt His values as our values. And that means submitting ourselves to the Lord who tests the righteous. And it means praying the prayer of another psalm. That prayer, search me, O God. Know my heart. Try me and know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is any offensive way in me. We must allow the Lord to reveal to us the covert ways in which we have embraced this culture of violence. The culture that reduces men and women made in the image of God into mere objects, much like prey in the eyes of the hunter. And when confronted with evil, horrendous evil, evil that Dylan Roof visited upon the families and the survivors of Charleston, evil that he visited upon us because they were our brothers and sisters, we must join the Lord in His battle and triumph over evil. The letter to the Colossians, the Apostle Paul gives us a picture of God's triumph over the forces of evil and the arena in which that battle took place. Speaking of Jesus, he says, and having disarmed the powers, the authorities, He made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross. See, in the cross we see evil in its fullest expression. The torturous murder of the Son of God. Yet it was also in the cross where the power of evil was, in the words of N.T. Wright, exhausted, as the cross became the gateway for forgiveness, reconciliation, and new creation to enter this world. And we saw this in the aftermath of Charleston. We saw the power of evil become exhausted and defeated. We saw it in the courtroom of the bond hearing, less than 48 hours after the shooting. As the judge gave family members the opportunity to speak to Dylan Roof about the evil that he had perpetrated against them. We heard evil's defeat. In the words of Nadine Collar, the daughter of murder victim Ethel Lane. Like our psalmist, Nadine didn't minimize the evil that was done to her, but she refused to be a prisoner of that evil. I forgive you, she said. You took something very precious away from me. I will never talk to her again. But I forgive you. And may God have mercy on your soul. You hurt me. You hurt a lot of people, but if God forgives you, I will forgive you. See, if we're going to join God in His battle and His triumph over evil, this is the path that we all must walk. But it's a journey that we all take at our own pace. Not all of those who were so closely affected by the Charleston shooting were able to come to that forgiveness as early as Nadine did, but it was all a destination that they eventually knew that they had to go to. And unlike that fairy tale ending we would like to imagine, in the fallout after evil has invaded the sanctuary, there is so much brokenness and pain still left. It's very messy. See, even when the upright in heart behold His face, it's always through a prism of tears. And one last story from Charleston really portrays this truth so well. See, in the months following the shooting, Felicia Sanders had one request of the FBI. She wanted the return of the 2 Bibles that had been taken from the crime scene. The FBI said they were unrecoverable, but she insisted. So the investigators sent her Bible and Twanza's Bible to the Bureau's high-tech lab in Quantico, Virginia, where lab technicians cleaned the Bible as thoroughly as possible, leaf by leaf. Felicia Sanders has her Bibles back now. The pages are pink with the blood that will never wash away. But she can still read the words underneath. That's really a metaphor for Felicia Sanders, for all the survivors of Charleston as they're walking through life now. And my prayer this morning is that in some way God would give us the grace that when the foundations are crumbling, people would still be able to read the words underneath the stain. Amen.
Amen.